is a CBS News special report. I'm Norah O'Donnell in our nation's capital. Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg is about to make history, even in death. She will become the first woman and the first Jewish person to lie in state. It is a rare honor. Her casket is arriving at the U.S. Capitol, accompanied by her family. It will be brought to the Capitol's Statuary Hall, and that's where a ceremony will honor the late justice. Of course, this follows a two-day public viewing at the Supreme Court. Boy, there were thousands of people who filed past to pay their respects to the longtime judge, law professor, and advocate for gender equality, even someone that Justice Roberts called a rock star. She died 1 week ago today at the age of 87. And as you can see, these are the east front steps of the Capitol, where Speaker Nancy Pelosi and the Democratic leader in the Senate, Chuck Schumer, are waiting for her casket and family. This will be a chance for House and Senate leaders to say farewell. We will hear in the ceremony from House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. We'll also hear from Rabbi Lauren Holtzblatt, who also spoke on Wednesday at the ceremony where Justice Ginsburg lay in repose at the Supreme Court. The rabbi's husband was one of Justice Ginsburg's law clerks. We're also going to hear from opera star Denise Graves. She'll perform a nod to Ginsburg's well-known love of opera. And as we watch this solemn ceremony, I want to bring in CBS chief legal correspondent Jan Crawford. She's with us, and she's covered the Supreme Court throughout Justice Ginsburg's almost entire tenure there. And Jan, I think it's a good time to talk about the legacy of Justice Ginsburg.
Well, I mean, it's almost hard to put into words, because her legacy on the law began back when she was a lawyer. I mean, her first appearance at the Supreme Court was in 1973 when she was an advocate working at the American Civil Liberties Union. It was then that she was a powerhouse already. I mean, she told the all-male justices in that famous case for gender equality, "I ask no favor for my sex. All I ask of our brethren is that they take their feet off our necks." That was in 1973. Of course, 20 years later, as a justice, she continued that fight for gender equality and non-discrimination throughout the rest of her career.
And just so everyone knows, the name of that case that she argued?
A frontiero. I mean, she was an out-of-the-box thinker, not only as a lawyer, but as a justice. And because of that, she had a tremendous impact on the law and on society, as we saw during the last 2 days of mourning at the Supreme Court, where, as you said, thousands of women of all generations, young girls, came out to pay their respects and give thanks.
I do want to just dig for 1 second into that case, because I think it is worth reminding people about Frontiero, that case. It involved an Air Force, someone who served in the Air Force, but was denied benefits. Explain.
Because as Justice Ginsburg saw, and again, she was always thinking 10 or 15 years down the road what the law could and should be. So she looked at cases that had gender discrimination against men.
Yes.
And she saw that as a way to persuade the judges and justices, who of course at that time were mainly men, that gender discrimination in all forms was wrong. It was a really out-of-the-box way of looking at the law, and look what it did. It changed the law.
It changed the law.
And history.
And history. Let's touch in with CBS's Nancy Cordes. She's on Capitol Hill. And Nancy, just walk us through what we can expect from today's ceremony.
Well, Nora, now that the hearse has arrived here on the east front of the U.S. Capitol, it will be the casket will be unloaded. It will be carried up the steps by a military honor guard. You mentioned that House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Democratic leader Chuck Schumer waiting at the top of the steps to greet that casket, which will then be carried into Statuary Hall here at the U.S. Capitol, where Justice Ginsburg will lie in state. You went through the sort of nuts and bolts of this brief ceremony, a welcome by Speaker Nancy Pelosi, but I do want to focus on Denise Graves and the fact that she is going to be singing twice at this ceremony. And yes, it is absolutely a nod to Ginsburg's love of the arts, love of opera, but it goes further than that. Denise Graves had a multi-decade friendship with Justice Ginsburg, who saw her perform in Carmen and fell in love with her performance. And in fact, their friendship ran so deep that 10 years ago, when Justice Ginsburg's beloved late husband, Marty, passed away, Denise Graves sang at the memorial service. So they have a lot of history, a great friendship, and Justice Ginsburg herself said long before she dreamed of becoming a lawyer or a judge, certainly a Supreme Court justice, the first thing she can remember wanting to be was a great diva. But because her voice and her words was monotone, she said that she was told by her grade school teachers that she was a sparrow, not a robin, and that she should just mouth the words when the other children were singing. So that dream was dashed fairly early on, but it certainly led to a lifelong love of music, a lifelong love of the opera that will be respected today.
It's a great story. Nancy Cordes, thank you. Joining us now is Jeffrey Rosen, a longtime friend of Justice Ginsburg and president and CEO of the National Constitution Center. His latest book, Conversations with RBG. And Jeffrey, thank you so much for joining us. I know you have called Justice Ginsburg one of the most influential figures for constitutional change in American history. How can we describe how she's changed this country?
Justice Ginsburg had a vision, and that vision was that the Constitution should grow ever more embracive. That was her word, and it's a distinctive word. And I asked her what it meant once, and she said, I mean embracing the left-out people, not just grudgingly, but with open arms. And because of her tenacity, vision, strategic brilliance, and astonishing accomplishment as an advocate, she transformed the Constitution. She made it more embracive, to embrace women, people of color, LGBTQ people, immigrants, all because she felt that was a fulfillment of the promise of the Declaration of Independence that all men and women and human beings are created equal. How many people in our lifetime can we say have transformed the Constitution because of their vision? And that is the magnitude of this great woman's achievements.
If you had to characterize one case right now that many people may not be familiar with just because they don't study the law as closely as you or Jan Crawford, what case would you choose?
Well, Jan described so well the Frontiero case, and another case that meant a lot to Justice Ginsburg when she was an advocate is called the Wiesenfeld case, and that involved a man, Stephen Wiesenfeld, whose wife died, and he wanted to care for his young son. But the Social Security law at the time only allowed survivors' benefits to women, not men, on the stereotypical assumption that only women would be single parents or caregivers. So then advocate Ginsburg realized this was unfair. It limited the opportunities both of men and of their children and of women as well. And she took it up to the Supreme Court, and it convinced the all-male judges of their time to extend the benefits to women as well as men. It was a brilliant example of what Jan called her strategic vision in realizing that the Constitution has to extend its promises to all people, men and women alike.
And on a personal note, I love that you met Justice Ginsburg in an elevator bonding over opera.
We did. I was a young law clerk. She was in the elevator. I couldn't think of anything else to say. And I said, what operas have you seen recently? And we had a lifelong friendship over opera. You know, it's so meaningful, as you said, that Denise Graves will sing. She did have a lifelong friendship with the justice. And just, gosh, last week, it's amazing that so much has happened. The night before Justice Ginsburg died, the National Constitution Center convened her favorite opera singers to sing personal songs to her in tribute as part of our Liberty Medal ceremony. And Denise Graves was one of the 4 singers that she chose, and she sang the most wrenching piece, and it will be so extraordinarily moving to hear her sing today.
Sounds like such a beautiful ceremony. I also want to take a moment to just talk about the 2 days that she lay in repose at the Supreme Court and the thousands of people that waited in line for hours to pay their respects. People kneeling, people praying, people brought their little girls. I mean, the pictures of the little girls dressed up in black dresses with the white lace collars, little girls dressed up as, you know, Wonder Woman and Superman. You know, to have an effect on the law and changing the country over her 3 decades. But I think as the Chief Justice explained, she also became a cultural icon in her later years in life.
People really feel like they knew her. I mean, for them, I think, and you saw that, I mean, we've seen it a while, but certainly expressed over the last couple of days at the Supreme Court. I mean, this is a personal loss for them. They know who she was when she went through, how much we must pause and give thanks for the sacrifices and efforts she made that will make this country better for all women, young, old. She influenced generations of women. And because she became this cultural icon, which, by the way, she kind of got a big kick out of. Like, she thought it was funny that she was referred to as the notorious RBG. She kind of embraced some of that later in life, which is, to me, a reflection of how she was willing to kind of always think about new things and things that may not be familiar to her and learn new things. And she enjoyed that. But that made her even more. I mean, she was on Saturday Night, the sketches on Saturday Night Live about her. And that made her even more, in a way, resonate with people of all generations. So I thought what was so moving, like you said, the lines, hours long. At one point, when I was walking by on Wednesday, there were multiple lines, blocks long. That would kind of merge into one. People would just see a line. They wanted to see her and give their respects. They just got in it and waited. It was a wonderful atmosphere in some ways. People were singing hymns and sharing stories.
How did she feel about that nickname, Notorious RBG?
She thought it was funny. She all of these kind of cultural iconic moments, she embraced and rolled with it. She was always asked about them in her interviews and speeches, and she would go to law schools or universities. People always wanted to talk about that, or the Saturday Night Live sketches that she would be kind of featured in.
And correct me if I'm wrong, was that title given to her after her dissent in Shelby County versus Holder?
And someone just kind of randomly threw it out there, and it's like one of these things where a woman came up with this, and it was one of these things where it just picked up steam, and then you saw it was all of a sudden it's on mugs and T-shirts and the crown. I mean, it really took a life of its own.
And as we await this ceremony to begin on Capitol Hill, as Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg becomes the first woman in history to lie in state in the U.S. Capitol, I want to bring in University of Michigan law professor Margot Schlanger, who is one of Justice Ginsburg's former law clerks. And Professor, thank you so much for joining us. Tell me what this day means to you.
Well, I mean, I think it's really beautiful that somebody who was so important to expanding we the people, to expanding equality in this country, is getting the kind of recognition from the government to be lying in state. I think that there have been a lot of women who have made really great contributions, and so in some ways it's a shame that she's the first, but I think it's great that she's able to do that, and that the people who admire her are able to see that.
And what was she like working for her as a clerk? I know that she treated her clerks like family.
She really did. I clerked for Justice Ginsburg her first 2 years on the Supreme Court from 1993 to 1995, and I mean, it was the most formative professional experience and the greatest privilege professionally that I'll ever have. She was a very exacting boss. She worked very, very hard, and she worked till all hours, and she always did her best work, and she expected those things of us too. She expected us to work very hard, to always do our best work, to never phone it in because something wasn't that big a deal. And she expected us to be really thoughtful and to give her what she needed to exercise her, really terrific judgment. And so that was our job.
And Professor, the New York Times did this wonderful piece about how her clerks viewed her as a generous mentor who kept them to high standards. And it was this phrase, get it right and keep it tight. What did that mean?
Yeah, so it was really important to her that every word be correct in every piece of writing, and that no word be unnecessary. So, I mean, just for example, we would cross out adverbs because she thought adverbs were a lazy way of not using the right verb. And so it was really important to her that the work be dead on accurate in all of its particulars, that it say exactly what she intended to say, and that it not use any extra words to say that.
her meticulousness as well as her mentorship remembered by her clerks as we take our first look inside Statuary Hall, where this ceremony will begin. And I'm told there, yes, that the former Vice President Joe Biden and his wife Jill Biden are there, along with a number of members of Congress and including her former trainer, very famously the workouts of the notorious RBG. But she believed into her 70s and 80s, important to stay healthy. He is there, her trainer.
I mean, and that kind of goes to the legend that is Justice Ginsburg, right? I mean, she even went on the Stephen Colbert show and tried to show him, he, pretended to try to do some of the workout along with her. She just always, I mean, she was kind of this person, as we're hearing this morning, brilliant lawyer, incredible tactical writer, precision of language. But she also had always a sparkle in her eye. Like she kind of liked being in on the jokes too.
Mm-hmm. And as we pay tribute to Justice Ginsburg, I want to take a moment also to talk about the future of the Supreme Court, because Jen, I know you've done an enormous amount of reporting on this. The president has said that he will choose a woman, and is Judge Amy Coney Barrett still at the top of the short list?
Yes, former Notre Dame law professor. She clerked for Justice Scalia. She is a favorite of the Washington Republican legal establishment and has been for some time. There hasn't really been a staunch conservative woman on the Supreme Court. Justice O'Connor, the first woman nominated, of course, by President Reagan, tended to be more moderate on social issues. So she's been a favorite of the right for some time. The president interviewed her for the last vacancy when he picked Justice Kavanaugh. She is far and away the leading frontrunner. There's not been a final decision, and with the president, I think we're going to have to wait and see on Saturday that this is actually the pick, but that is certainly the expectation here in Washington and on Capitol Hill. Senate Majority Leader McConnell already has said he has the votes to confirm her before the election, and senators now are preparing for her to be the nominee and go through those confirmation hearings sometime next month.
Let's pause for a moment and watch as the Honor Guard removes the casket of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg as she makes this entrance into the U.S. Capitol, making history as the first woman ever to lie in state at our Capitol. And as we watch the Honor Guard bring the casket of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg into the U.S. Capitol, Jan reminds me just how incredibly rare this is. I've noted that she is the first woman ever, but this is even a rare honor for a U.S. Supreme Court justice, right?
Only one other justice in our history is laid in state at the Capitol, and he happened to be president. He was president of the United States before he became Chief Justice, and that was William Taft in 1930. No associate justice. She is the first to lie in state at the U.S. Capitol, and only the second justice to do so.
The great precision of our U.S. military and honor guard.
Ready, step. Ready, step.
It's very moving just to watch. And we saw at the Supreme Court on Wednesday, the officers also taking her up the steps as her law clerks flanked the casket on the steps of the Supreme Court.
Ready, step. Ready,
almost her last act of service that she has given this country.
Ready, step.
To lie in state and lie in repose while the nation can give its respects.
Ready, step. Ready, step.
You know, funerals in some ways, memorials are a time to
Ready, step.
pay tribute, but also to remember someone's contribution, whether it's in your family's life or in the nation's history. And hers was immense, not only as a justice on the Supreme Court, but as you mentioned, the cases, the 4 or 5 cases she argued before the Supreme Court.
And if we think about what she meant not only to the law in the country, but to her colleagues, one of the most striking things I thought on Wednesday were the images of the 8 justices, the current justices. They just almost looked hollowed out. I mean, just gutted by this loss. Remember, they had not been together since March. They've been hearing arguments on telephone. None of them have even been in the same room since March. She was with them then. And then they gather to say goodbye. Of course, she's gone.
Across Washington, flags have been flying at half-staff in honor of Justice Ginsburg. Gian, what does it mean for the court if Judge Barrett is confirmed as a justice? Will this cement a conservative majority for decades to come?
Yes, unless the membership, of course, changes again. But the Supreme Court right now is narrowly divided, or it was narrowly divided 5-4, Justice Ginsburg being the leading liberal of the 4 liberal justices. But the Chief Justice at times would kind of switch over to the liberal side to rein in almost his conservative colleagues. So not only will this dilute his power, because there's going to be 6 conservatives now, it will mean that this court could be much more boldly conservative on a number of issues, especially social issues, which tend to divide the justices the most deeply.
On what issues could it matter the most?
The Supreme Court in every area of our lives has something to say, whether it's our relationships with our spouses, our medical choices, how we work, employment decisions. I mean, it's hard to understate. I mean, it's almost every aspect of American life the justices are asked to decide disputes.
You know, it was a question that I asked the Vice President this week when I interviewed him. I mean, this presidential election could end up at the Supreme Court as it did 20 years ago with Bush versus Gore.
It could. And I mean, it's 2020, so we may as well get ready for something like that too. I don't believe that the Supreme Court of 8 justices, some people speculated that we need an extra justice now so there's not a tie. I do not believe that John Roberts, Stephen Breyer, Elena Kagan, I do not believe they would allow the court to remain deadlocked 4-4 on an issue about the presidency of the United States. They would figure out a way. It would be a tremendous blow to the court, its institutional integrity, and the public may not even accept that. But it looks as if the president is going to be able now, with the votes, to get his nominee confirmed before the election, and he has said that's important to him because of the divided now 4-4 Supreme Court.
And on that note, let's bring in Nancy Cordes. And Jan has noted, you know, Judge Barrett, as a law professor, already prepared, and of course she's already been vetted because she was vetted for the seat that Kavanaugh now holds. What's your understanding about how quickly the Senate will move, Nancy?
Well, Nora, Lindsey Graham, who is the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, said yesterday that he is aiming to hold a confirmation hearing within about 12 days of the president naming his pick tomorrow. That is a very rapid timeline. He says he's determined to stick to it. It's possible there are a lot of things that could end up slowing things down. Part of the reason that Republicans here on Capitol Hill seem to favor Amy Coney Barrett over some of the president's other choices, who they say they like very much, is the fact that she has been vetted, that they know her positions, that she's been through this process so recently, back in 2017, when she went through another brutal confirmation process to be nominated and confirmed to her federal appeals court post. And so they believe that picking her would enable them to stick to that very rapid timeline. And the reason that they want to move so quickly is because they want to have all the options on the table. If they decide to push ahead with a confirmation vote before the election, they'll have time to do that. And so we do definitely sense a preference here on Capitol Hill for Amy Coney Barrett, although many Republican senators I've spoken to said that they would be very pleased with any of the individuals on the president's shortlist.
We are just minutes away from the beginning of this memorial ceremony in Statuary Hall, where we will hear from Speaker Pelosi, as well as a performance by Denise Graves, the opera singer and close friend of Justice Ginsburg, and then a reflection by Rabbi Lauren Holtzblatt, who spoke earlier and is a rabbi at one of the largest congregations here in D.C., where Ginsburg worshipped. In the era of coronavirus, we see guests wearing masks, socially distant. And paying tribute. Jan, what do we know about what Justice Ginsburg herself wanted to be remembered for?
Well, you know, she's been asked that question over the years, how would you like to be remembered? And yeah, I think as all the justices age, they frequently get that question a lot. And they all kind of say some variation of just that I was someone who, I followed the law, I was a good judge. And, you know, I think if you think about looking back on the impact of her career, I mean, I think it must be hard for even her to put into words, how do you want to be remembered? I mean, she wanted to be remembered as someone who cared about the law and advanced equality, and was a good judge.
There's a quote,
and she certainly was all of that.
Yeah. As someone who said, she said, I'd like to be remembered as someone who used the skills to the best of my ability, or something that, you know, used the skills that she was given. And she was once asked, what's the difference between herself and a Brooklyn bookkeeper, which was her mother? And she said, a generation.
Right, and that shows, I think, that story and her, I mean, it shows how she advanced progress for women, and her recognition that she was in a place to be able to do that where her mother could not. She took that seriously, and that also helped drive her forward.
You know, I was struck by how much she herself faced discrimination.
Yes,
and yet
going back to her first days at Harvard Law School, when she was one of 9 women in the class, a law professor asking them, you know, basically what were they doing there, taking the place of a man, working in New York after graduating at the top of her class from Columbia Law School, unable to get a job at a law firm. But she has said...
And she joked about that with Sandra Day O'Connor.
Yes, that was what I was going to say. I mean, I love this story because, you know, they kind of laughed about this later. Justice O'Connor had a similar experience coming out of Stanford Law School at the top, almost at the top of her class, couldn't get a job. And so they laughed about it, how if they'd gotten a job at a top law firm in New York or in Los Angeles or San Francisco, they would have just been a big-time partner at a law firm. But instead, they went and found their own way, a new path forward, and a way that then broke the path open for so many other women.
And became the first and second female justices on the U.S. Supreme Court. And today, is the last time I heard Justice Ginsburg speak in February here in Washington. She pointed out now how more than a majority of entrants and graduates into law school are women.
Right. And, you know, one thing she also always said, which we haven't seen yet, is someone asked her, how many women, basically, when will you be satisfied with the number of justices on the Supreme Court? And she said, when there are 9. 9. Because obviously, for most of history, there have been 9 men. So why not 9 women?
And let's pause and listen inside Statuary Hall.
Ready, face. Forward, march. Put. 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 Put.
The memorial ceremony for Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg is underway in U.S. Statuary Hall. We're going to hear shortly from the Speaker of the House. And has been noted, Justice Ginsburg is making history even in death because she is the first woman to lie in state, a trailblazer in so many ways. And as Jan Crawford has reported, this is so rare even for a Supreme Court justice to lie in state. She is the second justice ever, following only Chief Justice
William Taft.
William Taft, who of course was president before he became Chief Justice.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Honorable Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the United States House of Representatives.
It is with profound sorrow and deep sympathy to the Ginsburg family that I have the high honor to welcome Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg to lie in state in the Capitol of the United States. She does so on a catafalque built for Abraham Lincoln. May she rest in peace.
Ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Denise Graves, accompanied by Ms. Laura Ward. Ladies and gentlemen, Rabbi Lauren Holtzblatt.
Madam Speaker, Vice President Biden, Senator Harris, and to all of our leaders who are gathered today, thank you. Psalms 118, verse 5. Min hametzar karatia anani v'merchaya min hametzar karatia anani v'merchavya tidayayay 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 yaday naday naday. From the narrow straits, I call out to you. You, God, answered me with expanse. In the chambers of Justice Ginsburg hangs a framed piece of art that reads, Tzedek, Tzedek, Tirdof. Justice, justice, you must pursue. A command in the 16th chapter of Deuteronomy. The rabbinic tradition assigns meaning to every single word in the Torah. So there must be a reason why tzedek, justice, is written twice. The repetition here teaches Ibn Ezra, a medieval rabbi, that time and time again, all of the days of your life, you must pursue justice. This was how Justice Ginsburg lived her life, Justice did not arrive like a lightning bolt, but rather through dogged persistence. All the days of her life. Real change, she said, enduring change, happens one step at a time. She faced many obstacles in her life, even from a young age. Though chosen as the valedictorian of her high school class, she gave no graduation speech. Instead, she grieved at home with her father after burying her beloved mother one day before graduation. Her family had already suffered terrible loss with the death of her sister when Justice Ginsburg was only 14 months old. But Justice Ginsburg kept rising. A full scholarship to Cornell University and only one of 9 women in her Harvard Law School class. After transferring to Columbia Law School, she graduated first in her class, yet she could not find a job. No firm in New York would hire her because she was a woman. These obstacles didn't deter her. She pressed on. As she said in an interview with her dear friend, Nina Totenberg, and I quote, "I get out of law school with top grades. No law firm in the city of New York will hire me. I end up teaching. That gave me time to devote to the movement of evening out the rights excuse me, of women and men. I was nominated to a vacancy on the D.C. Circuit. Justice O'Connor once said to me, 'Suppose we had come of age in a time when women lawyers were welcome at the bar. You know what? Today we would have been retired partners from some large law firm. But because the route was not open to us, we had to find another way, and both end up on the United States Supreme Court.' All the days of her life, she pursued justice, even in illness. She fought 5 bouts with cancer, and she supported her beloved Marty through his battle with cancer as well. Each time, she pressed forward. She returned to work, to the bench, to the court, with focus, each and every time. Tzedek, tzedek, tirdof. Nothing was given. Pursuing justice took resilience, persistence, a commitment to never stop. As a lawyer, she won equality for women and men, not in one swift victory, but brick by brick, case by case, through meticulous, careful lawyering. She changed the course of American law. And even when her views did not prevail, she still fought. In recent years, Justice Ginsburg became famous for her dissents. Despair was not an option. She said, and I quote, "Dissents speak to a future age. It's not simply to say, my colleagues are wrong and I would do it this way. But the greatest dissents do become court opinions, and gradually, over time, their views become the dominant view, so that the dissenters hope that they are writing not for today, but for tomorrow." Justice Ginsburg's dissents were not cries of defeat. They were blueprints for the future. Justice Ginsburg loved her family, her grandchildren, her dear friends, her colleagues, and her court family. We all send our love to you. And Justice Ginsburg also loved the court, to which she so devoted her life. A court for all of us. It was Justice Ginsburg's tenacious hope to preserve the integrity of the court. Today, she makes history again as the first woman and the first Jewish woman to lie in state. Today, we stand in sorrow, and tomorrow, we, the people, must carry on Justice Ginsburg's legacy. Even as our hearts are breaking, we must rise with her strength and move forward. She was our prophet, our North Star, our strength for so very long. Now she must be permitted to rest after toiling so hard for every single one of us. May the memory of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Yita Rucho Batziro Leah, forever and ever be a blessing. Zichrona Livracha. God, give us the strength and bless us with the courage, the intelligence, the bravery, and the unbreakable resolve to pursue justice. Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, Miss Denise Graves, accompanied by Miss Laura Ward.
Share. Who fear in their hearts, there is no hero there. No, each
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain at your seats until escorted to pay your respects by the Sergeants at Arms staff.
And now the family of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg paying their respects. That was her daughter, Jane Ginsburg, and extended family members surrounding the casket. She will be laid to rest at Arlington National Cemetery. Next to her beloved husband, Marty Ginsburg. And Jen, maybe this is a good time to talk about that deep love between her and her husband of 56 years.
56 years. You know, and they just had this kind of, I mean, their marriage was, he was her rock. And literally, as she would talk about, saved her life, literally. When he noticed in one of her hospital stays that she was being given the wrong dose of medicine and ripped out the tubes. So, you know, she credits Marty Ginsburg with so much of what she was able to do in her life and at the Supreme Court. But she also liked to tell a story about, she also thinks he saved her life.
They met, of course, at Harvard Law School. She said he was the first man who respected her for her brains, but as an author wrote this week, that was humble brag because RBG was a knockout.
Right. And he was a brilliant lawyer himself. They had this wonderful friendship with the Scalias, which I, you know, find so touching, especially now when we seem so divided. But Marty Ginsburg was a fantastic cook, and so he and Maureen Scalia, Justice Scalia's wife, would do the cooking. RBG didn't really know how to use a stove. And they would have dinners together, celebrate New Year's Eves together, great adventures as a couple. And of course, her friendship with Justice Scalia goes back to their days serving on the Federal Appeals Court here in D.C.
One of Justice Scalia's son wrote a tribute to Justice Ginsburg today about the many New Year's Eves that the family spent together, where Marty Ginsburg and Mrs. Scalia would cook up the wild boar that Justice Scalia had killed in a hunting trip. But the families, even though they were fierce opponents on the court and really slung some arrows back and forth to each other rhetorically, they were the best of buddies.
And I wonder if that was something that you saw. I mean, obviously the loss of a colleague is affecting these justices now so deeply and so sharply. She was beloved at the Supreme Court, but is this perhaps, what does this mean for the court? Or will the justices even have these kind of friendships with Scalia and Ginsburg now gone, the nation's so divided? How do we put aside differences and bridge that gap like they did? She said in an interview she hoped we would come there in her lifetime, we would go back to a time when people could be friends with those that they may have sharp disagreement with on other issues. We're not there.
Jeffrey Rosen is still with us, and I'm going to turn to him in a moment to talk once again about Justice Ginsburg's legal legacy. But Jen, one other note, because Justice Ginsburg passed at the age of 87 after, as the rabbi said today, battling cancer 5 times. I mean, indomitable.
Well, and she never stopped working. Obviously, when the court closed in March because of coronavirus and they heard arguments by telephone, at one point when she was being treated in the hospital, she listened to those arguments with her law books around her from her hospital room by telephone. Justice O'Connor, the first justice, and Justice Ginsburg has talked about this, gave her advice. She went to Justice O'Connor about how to keep working after being treated for cancer. Justice Ginsburg had breast cancer surgery and was back on the bench. Justice O'Connor had breast cancer surgery and was back on the bench 9 days later. So she said that Justice O'Connor advised her, have your chemotherapy on Friday. Then that way you'll have the weekend to get over it. So, you can be back at work on Monday. And, I think that shows how she never, ever was going to give anyone a chance to say that she couldn't do the job, whether she was a woman, a Jewish, a mother, as she famously said initially, 3 strikes against her. But even with her illness, she just pushed through everything, a fighter at every level.
Never, never giving up. I mean, this incredible spirit. And on that note, Jeffrey Rosen, it was not only her own personal battles with cancer, but in many ways her approach to the law. As we just heard from the rabbi, as a lawyer, she won equality for women and men, not in one swift victory, but brick by brick, case by case, through meticulous, careful lawyering, she changed the course of American law. And Jeffrey, only because it's one that I've looked at, Read v. Read, where she wrote the brief in that, Jeffrey, that was the first time that the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment prohibited differential treatment based on sex. How much of that was a landmark decision?
It was indeed a landmark decision. You're so right to call that out, Nora, because that was the case that Justice Ginsburg said was the turning point. It was the first time, as you say, that the court struck down a gender-based discrimination. It did so unanimously, and Justice Ginsburg liked to tell the story about how it was a young boy, Richard Reed, who'd killed himself because his parents were having a custody dispute. His mother, Sally Reed, applied to be the estate administrator, but the law at the time preferred men to women. And Judge Ginsburg wrote the brief paying homage to the women who came before her, like Polly Murray. The court unanimously struck down the law, and as a result of that decision, Congress went through the U.S. Code and removed gender discriminations, and then Judge Ginsburg went on to persuade the Supreme Court to make gender discrimination subject to the higher judicial scrutiny. So it was a crucially important case for Judge Ginsburg and a perfect example of what you properly called her changing the law brick by brick, step by step, to create a more embracive Constitution.
There are so many of these. My own personal regret not going to law school, because so many of these decisions, even before she was on the Supreme Court, that she played a hand in, that have slowly changed the course of history and equality for women. And yet, for those legal scholars know, there is still an incredible challenges still ahead.
Well, when you think about the Supreme Court and the law, it's not, it's been said, it's not a speedboat. It doesn't turn sharply. The law doesn't change that quickly. It's more like trying to move like a super tanker. It takes patience and foresight to know how to turn that. And that was how she, as you were saying, the brick by brick, it requires enormous discipline, patience, and vision. And she had all of those coupled with this incredible technical gift with her precision of language. As her law clerk said, she would whack out all the extra words. Again, that makes her arguments even more powerful.
Thinking about her perseverance, her brilliance, her strategic thinking.
The vision.
The vision in order to do that.
And patience. It requires a discipline of patience to know that this is a step-by-step process and that you will get to the end in victory.
This has been an incredible moment of history to watch this entire week. And Jan Crawford, thank you.
Thank you.
For being here and sharing with us your incredible knowledge of the history since you've covered Justice Ginsburg for decades. It is a loss for so many and for this country, and a moment for all of us to learn about the great importance of the highest court on our land, the Supreme Court, where many of the justices chosen serve for decades and do, in fact, change every aspect of our lives. Our coverage will continue on our 24-hour streaming network, CBSN. You can watch it at cbsnews.com or on our CBS News app. There will be more to come on your local news on the CBS station and a full wrap-up tonight on the CBS Evening News. Some of you will return now to CBS This Morning. This has been a CBS News special report. I'm Nora O'Donnell, CBS News, Washington.